Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Listening to Lancaster. We are here on a very hot July day, recording with two individuals, which I will introduce. I'm here today speaking with Randall Puljek-Shank and Teddy Boucard, facilitators of the Healthy Masculinity program at the YWCA. This monthly group is for adult men to explore how masculinity impacts mental health, relationships, media, and more. We're here today to discuss an issue within that category from their framework, which is why are boys doing worse in school? From your research that you shared with me, I wanted to quote a statistic. A 2024 Stanford study found girls outperform boys by as much as a full grade level by eighth grade. So we're here to explore this question and understand how your work is meant to support progress in that area. Randy and Teddy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for
Great.
having us.
So I just want to start with just a bit of a note that neither Teddy or I are educational experts. So we are preparing this panel, and we're going to have some experts and encourage anyone to come. But we've really come to this from the healthy masculinity work and have researched this topic because we think it's something that's really important for really any parents or educators to know more about.
Awesome. And actually, if you wouldn't mind, before we start, because you just talked about what your background is, might either of you be interested in sharing what some of your professional background is or like what brings you to this work?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Teddy.
Yeah. So I feel like with me, I've always had a vested interest in community. Some of you I know I used to own a bookstore downtown for about 5 years. And so education is a big importance to me. And as far as now, I would say that I'm still involved with the community as far as YWCA, and I will always strive to continue doing that. I also am a chef, which I don't know how much falls into what we're talking about today, but yeah, just enjoy making a difference and always seeing what's next for the younger generation.
Awesome.
So I'm a political scientist by training, and I've been doing work with nonprofits, both globally and here in Lancaster, particularly about improving their impact. And so, yeah, I guess I come to this with that lens, but also as a father and just as an active member of the community, responding to what the YWCA invited us to do.
Awesome. Thank you both. Um, I will start with my first question for you, Randy, which is how is Lancaster County doing in the context of state and national trends when it comes to education?
Yeah, so actually, even though overall some of the statistics that you were mentioning, really the county is doing quite well and broadly in line with Pennsylvania State as well. So um, the state test results are slightly above Pennsylvania averages, and that means that math scores have gone up a little bit, reading scores have gone down, and that's a broader kind of post-pandemic trend. Graduation rates are a little bit higher than the state, so like 90% versus 88%. However, fewer young people are planning to go to college, and also lower in Lancaster County than in the state. And that's something that's been declining for years, right? So there's kind of some broader trends there. And one of the key things is that when you look at county statistics, that a little bit masks some significant differences between suburbs and the city. So that's one thing that in some way, like looking across the county, isn't always the most helpful thing for understanding what's going on and where the like most urgent needs are. In terms of completing bachelor's degrees, Lancaster County is a little bit lower than the national level. And the Amish and Plain population influences that, right? Because they're a group that doesn't really seek out education by and large, or higher education anyway. Um, and the gender gap, especially that you mentioned, is present, but it's not as huge as it sometimes come across in the statistics. And we can talk more about kind of what's going on there. So bachelor's people with completed bachelor's is 36% versus women and for 34% men. So that's comparable gap to the national level, but a bit lower.
Okay. So it sounds like from what you're saying, Lancaster County is doing pretty well in comparison to state and national trends. And maybe in areas where we would see a bigger age or gender gap, Lancaster's is a little bit smaller.
Yes, right. There's still some areas of concern, so we can come back to that. So like when you look at the overall picture, that doesn't necessarily tell you about particular groups that are particularly vulnerable and kind of falling behind.
Okay. Um, Teddy, I'd like to ask you next then, what are some key contributing factors to the gender gap in education when we're talking about this? Why is there a gap?
Yeah, what we've seen is like the gap mostly comes from development environment, not kind of like the ability of boys. But we've heard the sayings like boys' brains mature a little bit later. The areas for impulse control and planning develop about 2 years behind girls. And then by like 12th grade, boys and girls are even roughly in math and science. They're normally like pretty even around those times. So with that also, the real gap is more so 13 points in classroom behavior. Grades often reward sitting still, so boys tend to score lower than test results. Boys also hit a harder poverty and family instability when they're around that age, and you see a lot of like few less real male role models, which is kind of goes along with what we talk a lot about in healthy masculinity. Only about 70% of education degrees go to men, so pretty much all in short, timing, grading, home life, and culture stack up, and it's not really a difference in talent.
So it's somewhat of a development issue and then also kind of what's around you, and the, environment that they're being raised in.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. What are some of the most effective responses for parents, community groups, schools, and colleges to maybe close this gap?
Yeah, so the things that show the best results, hands-on training, work-connected learning and mentorship. Um, with career and technical education, male graduation rates go up by as much as 10%. Wages are like 30% higher in the beginning of the career, like in the early 20s. Programs like career academies also generate a significant earnings boost. What's called high dose tutoring, so like kind of intense regular tutoring, really shows a lot of benefit. And then back to what Teddy was just talking about, more male teachers and mentors, right, is really important. Giving models of kind of professional men around in the education environment. One thing that's been done is starting boys a year later, what's called redshirting. So that helps to offset some of the difference in the development rates, and get boys off to a better start in school. So, really overall, having different routes, like different kinds of programs, not only focusing on college, of course, and then locally, programs like Career Ready Lancaster, which bring together employers, educators, and apprenticeships, really seem to make a difference.
Yeah, I also I just recently participated in the Lancaster Chamber's Discovering Paths mentoring program, which works with high school juniors. And I find that that's a really helpful way to create some mentoring pathways and just have like real tangible connections with professionals in the community, which is very cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you just said the term, Randy, I've never heard anyone use this term before. Redshirting. That's when they hold them back by a year.
Yes, I have to admit that was a new, that was a new term for me too. But yes, the basic idea is start boys a year later in school.
Okay. And that's so that maybe their development is kind of a little bit similar to the other people in their.
Yeah, that just kind of balances out, some of the emotional kind of social development issues, and enables them to better benefit from school once they get to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, while we're on the topic of school, Teddy, I wanted to ask you about academic support that's available for students, and maybe why young boys are not feeling as encouraged to use them as their like female counterparts.
Yeah, well, the support is there. I think the biggest challenge is getting the boys to use it. I think with like a lot of us, just in regular life, we have a hard time asking for help. Schools and colleges offer tutoring, office hours, counselors, and mentoring, and high dose tutoring has the strongest track record. But boys use these less because they feel like asking for help is like a threat to their identity. Maybe feel like awkward, feel a little weird, asking for help. Understandable. The most common reason they give is wanting to handle it themselves. Stigma and not knowing how to ask add to it. It seems like uptake rises when help is more normal and low barrier. Visible role models trust online options and framing help seeking our responsibilities rather than weakness. Locally, I would say we have PA Career Links Young Adult Program. It offers GED instructions, case management. It also offers career planning. Though I would say the re-engaging of disengaged men is probably still the hardest part that we deal with right now.
So if I'm connecting the dots properly, like the story as you are sharing it now is that we're seeing disparities in education between boys and girls. And oftentimes a barrier for boys is not feeling like they're comfortable enough to ask for help. And so even if help is
Mm-hmm.
available, if you don't feel like you can ask for help, then this leads to kind of falling behind in your education and further in your career. And so as we're having this conversation, you all have been trying to understand where to intervene and how to be helpful in changing that dynamic.
Yeah, I would say that's spot on. I mean, I feel like it even starts from the home, when you can kind of see, your mom or dad ask each other for help. I think when you can start to see that live in action, it's kind of like, oh, well, dad did this, so maybe I can also be comfortable enough to ask. Or mom did this, I can also feel comfortable enough to ask. Or even if you see that within friendships, it doesn't have to just be the parents, it could be anybody that's kind of influencing their lives.
Mhm. So I want to put this in context with like young professionals, as you guys have been talking about different resources in the community. That, if we have a situation where younger men and boys are less inclined to kind of pursue solutions with their own education, how does that manifest when they start applying for jobs? And what do we know there?
Yeah, so definitely disengagement in school carries into work, right? And there's a particular vulnerable group called NEET, right? So not in education, employment, or training. And that group is mostly male, and that's 12% of men ages 16 to 24. So that's a concrete example of a group of young men who are not getting a good start in career, and from which it's hard to really kind of extract themselves. So young men that are not in school or work has doubled since 1990. So it went up from 4% to 8%. Two-thirds of them are not looking for jobs. There's some drivers of that, right? So there's fewer kind of traditionally male jobs, right, that may be offered an easy entree for those kind of group. If these people don't have college degrees, that's often a barrier for particular jobs. And to a certain extent, more of them are staying at home, and there's just less financial pressure of needing to establish themselves financially. And that, of course, hits well-being quite hard, right? So this is part of this. There's a kind of online discussion about male loneliness and male isolation, and I think this group is part of that as well, and therefore, and also vulnerable to some of the negative trends about understanding masculinity. We'll talk to in a little bit. So an example of a local program is PA Career Link, which is young adult, and there's also an Earn and Learn program, right? So those provide paid work experience and support, right? So not expecting them to be able to enter into a career, but actually providing support to make sure that they succeed in it.
Mhm. And I'm curious, Teddy, if you can talk, this is sort of going back in our conversation a little bit, but just for some more context, how soon do we start seeing gender disparity in educational attainment?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we've seen it starts pretty early, long before high school. Around age 5, girls are about 4 points more likely to be rated school ready. A reading gap is already visible in fourth grade, and it widens to about 11 points by the end of eighth grade. Behavior differences show up in I would even say preschool, where boys are expelled roughly 5 times more as often as girls. Um, Parents actually notice the maturity gap and hold boys back more often. By high school, it's pretty stark. Girls make about 2/3 of the top GPAs and boys about 2/3 of the bottom. And that gap follows students into college.
And Randy, can you speak to, if we're talking about these disparities, I'm curious then, where are boys and young men thriving? And maybe, because as we're going through this conversation, what I'm hearing is, I think Teddy, you might have said this earlier, that boys and young men struggle a little bit more. They might get in trouble in school more often. They struggle a little bit more with like the structure of it all. And so, we've talked about this in various ways, but like what areas are we seeing men thriving, and like can we learn something from that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question because I think it's really important to not just focus on the things that aren't working, but actually look at what things are working and exactly what you asked. How can we learn from that? So one way to think about that is, we can say that boys, or experts say that boys really need four things: so belonging, independence, mastery, and purpose. And sports is one way that that happens, right? So that's often a kind of key rite of passage. But that's a mixed bag, right? I mean, there's different kinds of sports cultures, right? So that's best when it's inclusive, right? When it's not just like let's be tough, but really really fosters teamwork and support for team members wherever they are. And so really again, it's a mixed bag, and there's different examples. Um, so things that are really fostering healthy masculinity, talking about courage and leadership, discipline, but also empathy, responsibility, and seeking help, like Teddy was talking about. There's I would say a combination of things that are traditional. All of them are traditional, but there's a question of what things are we emphasizing, right? And this moment, I think, does call out something different. Society has changed, and there's a need for fostering new things. And the caution is really that there's kind of fake version of these things out there. So it's not sports, right? The participation in sports, it's sports betting. It's following influencers who are, selling a really quite shallow version of masculinity and a hollow belonging. And like there's some guidelines from the APA, which talk about the dangers of rigid norms, right? So like traditionally that would be stoicism, dominance, just rely on yourself, and these things are really undermining the well-being of boys. You started with the question about what's working. I guess it's hard to not contrast what's working with what's not working, because both are present at the moment. And so there's really a lot of variety of what's happening in society, in schools, and families.
Mhm. I'm curious, if I could just take some time now. We've made references to your healthy masculinity group, and while most of this conversation, I think, has been focused on, younger boys and young men, the healthy masculinity group is targeted for adult men. Can you kind of talk me through some of your process of creating this group, and how your choice in focusing on adult men versus youth?
Yeah, no, I would actually say yes, it kind of goes with more so adult men, but it's not like we're opposed to also having younger men. I think probably we wouldn't go past like the college ways. But starting this off, we had a lot of interviews, conversations with different type of groups, whether it be like men groups, women groups, teachers, priests. We also had conversations with the people who classify themselves as feminists, just to kind of have a better understanding of what this topic means to not only ourselves, so we can be prepared, but also the community around us. And I think right now it's pretty important in our society right now as far as healthy masculinity. And honestly, I'd say right now too, we're still trying to figure out what healthy masculinity is. kind of the biggest words that we figured out talking to everybody is that it's really about being a decent human being. What does being a decent human being mean? And so when we can talk to people who are adults, we can kind of see what they're going through with their personal lives when it comes to marriages, workplaces, media, and just kind of have a bigger discussion of how we can move as people throughout these discussions.
Randy, I wanted to ask.
If I can just add on to that maybe a little bit. So I mean, we are getting the Y is getting some invitations to work more with young men. So we're kind of figuring that out, how that's going to work. And if I can take a chance to put in a plug here, we are preparing an event which is July 18th, which is going to be a panel discussion with some experts exactly on this education gap topic, and what's happening. So we'll have two expert people, and that's open for I think it'll be particularly interesting for parents and educators, but it's really open for men and women, anybody from the community that cares about this topic.
Yeah, you've made reference to at least one of the panelists. I'm curious if you'd be interested in talking a little bit more because you two have worked closely with them in what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I'll do the first one, and then Teddy can do the second one. So Dr. Floyd Beecham is a professor at Lehigh, and his area of expertise is really educational attainment. So we wanted to bring in someone who knows the literature and knows the research, and also the practice of what's happening in schools to overcome some of these gaps.
Mhm.
And then we also have Melinda Harnish Clatterbach. She's actually an executive director with the Conestoga River Club. She's actually also too a local counselor therapist here downtown, YMCA board member, and part of the LGBTQ Giving Circle. I've actually worked with her very closely, and I know that through actually when we were having our initial conversation interviews to get ready for these sessions, she was one of the people that we spoke to, and she just had a very good insight to what she saw as far as growing up when it comes to like young education, and also what she sees now with her involvement.
Mm. That's great. And for anyone watching, we'll have all of that information linked below for how to join this event on the 18th. Randy, I wanted to ask you a question in case you didn't get to come back to this. My first question, I was asking you a little bit about to paint a picture of the landscape here in Lancaster County. At Hourglass, we're always really focused on Lancaster County and quality of life issues, and you were giving some statistics and made a nod to there are some problem areas here. There are some problem areas that we'll talk about. Is there anything that we didn't get to or didn't talk about specifically when we're thinking about Lancaster, gender gaps in education, and just sort of how we function here specifically that you didn't share, or do you feel like you were able to get to it?
I think we were able to cover it. Like a big one for sure is that NEET group, right? Which is as present here in Lancaster County as it is elsewhere. And there's another issue. It's not specific to Lancaster County, but I think didn't maybe come out in what we were talking about. Although like I talked about bachelor degree attainment, right? So like the percentage of adult men and women that have bachelor's degrees. But I think that there's a change coming in that at the moment, roughly 60% of bachelor's degrees are awarded to women, right? So this is a national trend, and you can't see it yet in the statistics. It takes a while. These are people who are just finishing college, but that's not a small difference, right? That is, quite a larger number of women completing college, college is part of a path to a good professional career, not the only one for sure, but and so I think that's an issue that isn't visible yet quite in the statistics, but is a concern going forward.
Mm. That's helpful. And with just a few minutes left, I was curious to ask you. I mean, we've talked about this one healthy masculinity dialogue group that you have. I know this is part of a larger, host of programming activities that you are doing with YWCA. Is there anything else you want to talk about within that you're working on?
Yeah, Randy might have touched on it a little bit. We're actually having conversations to speak to different schools, seeing how they're doing within their classes, and kind of see what we can do as far as having the conversation when it comes to healthy masculinity. Our sessions that we have currently, they run every fourth Sunday, and we're kind of just working to expand that. And I know individually and together, we're actually touching upon other men groups too that are kind of having their own kind of conversations, whether it's about healthy masculinity or something else. We kind of want to implement what we're talking about into those groups. Randy's more soon to be somewhere locally. Myself, I'm trying to have a conversation with people with these men groups in Reading and Philadelphia, and so just working a little bit on that.
Right.
And the idea really for the young men work is we're looking at partnering with some groups that are already working with them. So it also it makes it logistically easier to organize, but also there's a focused group that we can facilitate a discussion about healthy masculinity, and kind of that helps us to better understand the issue, make sure that we're doing things that are relevant. So we're kind of learning and testing that part of it.
Great. With just a couple minutes left, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about during this time?
I feel like this was great. This was great. I mean, we had a chance to talk about the things that are important and get the word out. Also, again, just to highlight that panel discussion, because we're really trying to, in some way, we're using this to kind of draw people in, offer something really concrete, and maybe help develop a broader sense of what healthy masculinity is, right? Like, I think that an important aspect of healthy masculinity is caring for young men and boys, not only young men and boys, young men and women too. But this is kind of a concrete way to work at that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think these questions are great. We really appreciate you giving us the time, the space, and the platform to talk about healthy masculinity as well as our panel. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, just to repeat, all of the information for the upcoming panel on July 18th is either below us on YouTube right now or in the email that you all are receiving. And Teddy and Randy, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And good luck as the work continues.